Okay, welcome everybody to the DevOps short course with Charles Sturt University and IT Masters presented by the inimitable Brenton Birchmoor. Thanks everyone for putting your location in the chat. It's fantastic to see people from all over, not just Australia, but the world. I've seen people from about 5 different continents, so that's fantastic to see the international reach. My name's Jack. I am an eligibility assessment and course consultant with IT Masters and CSU. And I'll be introducing Brenton in just a moment. Some of you may know him from some of his other short courses that he's presented for ITM or from full-length subjects that he's presented as well. Just before we get properly started, I'm going to put up a poll here. So the question is, which of the following options would best describe your journey or perspective on software services? So you can choose one. Executive, I have a non-technical but decision-making role or perspective. Dev, I work mostly in the development or creation of software services. Ops, I work mostly in the ongoing operations and delivery. User, my work depends upon the successful work of both teams. Or external, I'm not closely involved with software services. So I've just launched that poll, so you can go ahead for the next 5 or so minutes and while we introduce the course and Brenton and fill in that poll, and then I'll let you know the results of that in a few minutes. And so once again, welcome everybody to the short course. Like I said, my name is Jack. We also have Kit here, Kit French, who is going to be doing some tech support and kind of back of house stuff to keep everything all running smoothly. So thank you very much, Kit, who will be handling this. In terms of interacting with the presenters, if you have questions or comments that are specifically related to the materials that are being covered, you can go navigate to the bottom of your screen, just across to the right, and enter those in the Q&A section. So those are questions that are specifically about the materials being covered. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can throughout the webinar, as well as at the end. So it'll be more of a Q&A section. If you have questions about the administration of the short course or about IT Masters, Charles Sturt University more generally, things like enrollment, eligibility, course credit, subject selection, that sort of thing, feel free to direct those to the chat function. And you can also ask those questions at any time later on after this webinar specifically has finished. And Kit and the wonderful Hannah will be answering those on learn.itmasters.edu.au, which is also where you'll be able to access the recordings of tonight's session, which will be made available within 24 hours of finishing the session, as well as all of the other course materials is where you'll find those. So that's learn.itmasters.edu.au is where you can find all of the course materials that you might like. And also, before we get officially started, I would just like to acknowledge that we are, or IT Masters is based on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, Australia, whose sovereignty was never ceded, and whose elders and ancestors we would like to acknowledge, as well as their ongoing connection to lands, waters, and cultures. So, without further ado, I think I will. I'll let this poll go for a slightly longer. I'll just introduce Brenton very quickly. So Brenton Birchmoor is a very familiar face for IT Masters. He has been around for 12 years with ITM and CSU. He has authored 14 subjects in those 12 years, 12 of which are still currently running, primarily around the subjects that are available for the Graduate Certificate in Computing, the Master of Business Administration or Graduate Certificate of Business Administration, or the Project Management kind of space, but across a variety of subject areas. And he's actually our highest rated mentor for IT Masters and CSU. Brenton is, he's been away from running short courses for about a year, and he's been highly in demand. So I'll just really quickly end this poll and read you out the results of it, and then we'll get Brenton on the line. So the poll results, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them right now, but we have for the question, which would best describe your journey or perspective on software services? The top result is ops. So 33% of people answered that they mostly work in the ongoing operations and delivery. Then we have 23% working in dev, in the development / creation of software services. 18% external, who are not closely involved with software services. 14% executive, have a non-technical but decision-making role or perspective. And 12 of you are users whose work depends upon the successful work of both teams. So thank you very much for everyone's participation in that poll. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to get started to Brenton, who is coming to you from Singapore, I believe.
I am. Thank you, Jack. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome. And hello to Kit and everyone for joining in. I've watched the chat scroll terrifically fast. It's been exciting to see everyone's points and thoughts and comments, where everyone is from, an outstanding range of places around the world, which is always very exciting to see where everyone's from. We are at the beginning of an exciting 4-week journey. We're hoping that we're going to be able to fill you with some new knowledge and probably give you the opportunity to share a bit of your own along the way through the forums as we cover things in the next few weeks. Hopefully, we'll be able to set the scene tonight, give some opening remarks, a bit of an introduction, uncover the fundamentals. We're not going to go into a great deal of how-to details. We only have the 4 weeks, the 4 topics in our short course. So this is mostly to unpack and unravel some of the why underneath, some of the reasons, the forces, the things behind why this exists the way it does, the fundamental ideas that we need to think about. We will drill down a little bit more on some of those in the next few weeks, but hopefully tonight we'll be able to give you a good starting overview. Now, we will have a couple of opportunities to take questions. So if you think of any as we go along, put them in the Q&A tool in Zoom, and they'll be captured at some point. We'll take some natural pauses and take some of those questions and have a bit of a chat. And at the end, with whatever time we have left, and I think we should have quite a bit of time, we'll be able to capture a lot more questions and see how much we can get covered in that time. Let me go through a bit more of an introduction about myself. I'm just clicking share on that, Jack. I don't know if you did or not, or if we missed that. I still had a share button.
On the poll there?
Yeah.
Yes. Can everybody see the poll results?
Can see the poll now. Okay.
Brilliant. Fantastic. We'll keep that up until we until we're about to until we get to some more content probably.
And thank you for that lovely and warm introduction. It is
not a problem.
It is nice to be missed. I've missed these short courses. I love doing them. I really do get a kick out of trying to find ways to compartmentalize a lot of this information and knowledge into short but powerful doses. I think it's an exciting format. And I love being part of it. So I was fortunate that a window opened up with a topic that I love talking about. And as many of you who've heard from me before will know that I love to talk. So occasionally someone will have to reel me in if I get too carried away on something, but hopefully we'll keep it under control as we go through tonight. Let me stop the sharing of the poll. I hope everyone's had a chance to have a look at that. I think Kit also put it in the chat. I'm going to close that. What are we going to cover? A quick overview of the syllabus. We are going to talk about the fundamentals tonight, some basic introduction to the ideas that have led behind and that underpin DevOps. We are next week going to talk a bit more about flow, continuous delivery, and we're going to talk about some of the elements and where it's come from through Kanban and what it really means within development and operations to have continuous delivery and flow. In our third week, we'll talk about information flow between teams and between key stakeholders. So we'll talk about ideas like feedback and feed forward and how crucial and valuable the flow of information is between people involved. And on the final week, we're going to talk about learning and growth and how to create an environment, how important the environment is to support learning and the growth that's necessary, the evolution and continual improvement that comes from the opportunity to learn not just from our own mistakes, but from everything that happens. So this is our journey over the next few weeks. Today, we're going to talk a bit about Agile in particular. We're going to address its starting point, where we came from, with why Agile is our introduction to DevOps and how it arose. We will talk a bit about how Lean, which has preceded DevOps, how that's influenced and led the way in some ways to what DevOps has become. We'll talk about flow and Kanban a little bit. Now, we're not going to have time to go into details about how to Lean and how to Kanban, but we'll talk a bit about the connection points between these ideas and what they have become within the DevOps mind frame. And we'll, of course, have to talk about information and how it all hangs together. This is the lifeblood of what makes DevOps a thing instead of being two things. It's the information and its flow that is the glue that makes everything work together very well. And I'm going to try and talk through that as we go. Now, who am I? Some of you might already be familiar with me. I am an Australian. I was born in Australia, spent most of my life living in Australia. I've been in Singapore for the last 12 years, where I live here now with my family. I can sort of call myself a global citizen because I have tried to neutralize my accent, and I've tried to view the world from a very non-nationalistic perspective. I have spent, prior to working with IT Masters, a number of years in the IT world. I actually started in sales. I became an engineer and a technician. I was configuring routers. I was deploying networks, and I ran a team of people doing that at some point. I ran an IT services department. I then moved to run a project delivery department. And by the time I left the industry, I was an operations director, managing all aspects of the delivery of IT services for an organization based in Australia. I have since then run my own business, or even prior to that. I have run a few successful businesses. I still run two at the moment. I have been teaching for a bit over a decade, and I think last time I checked, we were at over 80,000 students enrolled in my various courses that I've done with IT Masters. As Jack mentioned, I have created 14 courses, full subjects in the Masters programs with IT Masters over the years, 12 of which are still up and running. And this is my 8th short course, I believe, with IT Masters, which is an exciting milestone. I have my own app, which is under redevelopment at the moment. It's being relaunched later this year. It is a scenario learning app, so you'll probably hear more about that in due course. And personally, I'm a great believer in game-based learning and scenario-based learning. I am absolutely a gamer. I started as a teenager in role-playing Dungeons and Dragons. I've done tabletop wargaming. I've attended many of the tournaments around Australia when I was in my 20s. And of course, computer games. Being a believer in game-based learning, of course, I've spent many hours in online games. I would easily have accumulated over 20,000 hours in online games. I call it research. My wife calls it something different, and my teenage son is working very hard to catch up. So that's a little bit about my background and journey.
Absolute icon of IT Masters. Could I have an example of 2 games that you like to play online, please?
Oh, I tell you a couple of different games. I'm currently playing World of Warcraft, a major classic game with a bunch of friends. I'm in that mostly because that's where my friends are at. And so that's a regular Monday and Wednesday night thing. I've also really enjoyed other forms of PvP games like World of Tanks is one of my big favorites. But I've played so many different other genres of MMOs, everything from Star Wars, a bunch of science fiction MMOs, even Pirates of the Caribbean. I've played, oh goodness, all the way back to EverQuest, EverQuest 2, Dark Age of Camelot, decades ago, from the early days of online fantasy MMOs, all the way through to today. So still doing it. And I just noticed, Bryce, yes, 50 DKP minus, of course, we all know that meme. More dots.
Excellent. Fantastic.
Yes,
this is great.
That's a good shout out for some of the other fellow gamers out there. Here's my list of subjects that I've authored. We'll skip through this. There's a list you can find in a number of places. That just sort of gives you a bit of an idea of where my journey has taken me. And as you can see here, a lot of them are to do with IT services, and the delivery of IT. Let's get into the discussion about what we're going to cover tonight. I want to start with a really fundamental question about agility. I want to rethink the idea of what is agility. It's a buzzword, and we've heard it many times. We've heard about agile. I mean, being agile sounds cool, right? I mean, it sounds like something out of some Marvel superhero. I mean, like Hawkeye and Black Widow, they were agile, right? And it sounds cool when we think of it in a heroic fashion. But what is it really is about decision-making. It's about forming a bond between the decision that needs to be made, the information that needs to be allowed to input that decision, the people and their knowledge and experience that need to be involved in that decision, and the timing of that decision. And when you perfect all those parameters of a decision, and then you add onto that a good method of decision-making, that's when you have agility. Because a decision is an opportunity to continue or to alter, to change course, to do something other than what you might have previously decided. So every decision we go through in life or in work is an opportunity for agility. And the more agile we make that decision, the more we're able to react and adapt to whatever those most current, most recent forces and inputs might be. So if that's the core of agility, it's perhaps no wonder that it's become such a buzzword. And it's also perhaps no wonder that it's got its tendrils into so many of the different things and the different ways that we go about doing things. It's probably also no surprise that it's really deeply involved in everything to do with technology, because we know that things change rapidly in technology. And agility, as a broad concept, as a simplistic idea, is the buzzword that helps us think, well, we can react to and deal with the ever-changing world of IT if we bring some agility to it. But that's only the philosophy. It's how we do that that is usually the measure of our ultimate success. But there's some reasons we should look underneath the hood of why is agility happening to us in so many different ways. And the point I'm trying to put here is that it's inevitable that agility is going to continue to push its way into what we do. And it's going to continue to ask us to get better and better at making better decisions. So around the world, and for the last several decades, not just in technology, but if you look at manufacturing and all the other different industries where things have evolved, the idea of separated teams is very quickly starting to erode. And the benefit of having each team know what the other team is doing, and I'm not just talking about DevOps now, I'm talking about sales versus technology versus production versus logistics versus executive. There's a growing trend towards empowering and leveraging the opportunity for people to understand what's over the fence and how do they work, because we know that the success of the business relies on synergies. And so we're looking more for those synergies. We're looking to break down those barriers and those walls, because that's what the competition is doing. So the secret to making this feasible now is information. And you can buzzword it and say, yeah, big data. Yes, that in simple terms is a big part of why these opportunities are happening now. Because there's now a great opportunity for different people to have access to different information and have access to it right now or right when they need it. And that feasibility is changing what's possible and therefore changing what we are trying to do in all industries. And of course, one thing that nearly all industries have in common is a relationship with technology. In as much the same way as they all have a relationship with money and finance. Well, they all have a relationship with technology now. And so when we can help all the decision makers in all teams, including the development and operations teams, when they can broaden or deepen their context for the decisions that they're making and more clearly understand the ramifications, the repercussions, the situation around their decisions, the better their decisions will be. The better that will be for everyone concerned. So the fundamental push behind why this agility is hounding us every day is because better decision-making makes for better business. It makes better customer value, which delivers better business value, more efficient, more profitable. Everything gets better when more of our people get to make better decisions. And so this has led to a bunch of things like Scrum as a way of making better decisions during empirical project creation and management. It's also led to things like DevOps as a way to make better decisions in the creation, delivery, and maintenance of software and related services. So there is this conflict that exists between development and operations. And if we say, okay, accepting the fact that the silos are breaking down, and some would say they kind of have to, and we can see some of the reasons why that's happening. Why is it not happening neatly for everyone everywhere? And a lot of that is to do with the fact that there is a persistent focus for certain teams on what's unique to them, what's different about them, what's different about a development team, and what's different about an operations team. And let's cling on to that. Let's champion that. Let's hold on to that. Well, yes, those differences are there, and they're valuable and they're important. But a way of blending doesn't necessarily mean we erode those differences. It means we leverage those differences. And when we leverage a difference, that's a definition of a synergy. And that's what DevOps is looking for. Part of the reason that's hard is because at the executive level, a lot of organizations measure outcomes discretely. They measure a development outcome or a team's outcome differently from how they measure an operations outcome. And that creates an inherent conflict, because a lot of the time there's mutually exclusive forces at work. And unless there's a way to mitigate the conflict between those mutually opposing forces, that means the teams will be in conflict because they'll have to resolve it somehow. So separate goals, keeping them separate, is a part of the problem that we're trying to solve with something like DevOps. We all know about technical debt, and a large reason why technical debt exists, the fact that when you try and fix a problem later in a technological way, that technical debt is how much harder it is because of how much later it is from when it was last looked at, from when it was created, from when whatever happened. This accumulation of complexity, building upon and building upon, accumulating, it leads to a growth in one-sided decision-making. And again, I'm using the example here of dev and ops. Technical debt promotes the need for ops to make more ops-related or focused decisions to meet ops-related goals, and devs to make dev-related decisions to meet dev-related goals. So you get this stability problem, right? Stability of existing services, let's keep the lights on, let's not break it, let's not upset the customers, versus, yeah, but we have to bring something new in because it's getting stale, it's getting stagnant, and our competitors are doing something new. So you get devs that are saying things like, wow, operations are always, cramping our style, they're squashing our great ideas, they're constraining us, we can't get this new stuff out there. The customers want this, the ops is in our way. And then we have ops teams that are saying things like, yeah, but the devs never really understand what it takes for ongoing reliability. They introduce problems, they introduce risks, it's not tested properly. It's always headaches for us. And so this conflict continues. And it's largely because the teams are allowed, perhaps even encouraged through their goals and metrics, to aim for different directions. So none of this would likely be that out of the ordinary for all of you, but let's hear what you actually have to say. Let's run that poll. Jack, can we run that second poll, please? I want to get everyone's opinions. Have your say. Before we get too deep into all the rest of it, tell us what you think.
All right, that poll should be live now. Thank you. So the question is, what do you believe is the most common problem with achieving high-value software services today? And we've got options, which are the devs don't try hard enough to make sure their stuff works reliably. The devs do try, but they're so limited by low resources or high expectations. Devs and ops share equal blame as neither work closely enough together to help each other succeed. Ops try to make new stuff work, but are under-resourced or have unrealistic demands of reliability. Ops are more concerned about uptime of yesterday's stuff than letting tomorrow's stuff get deployed. Or I have little idea why it's so hard for either team. So I'm interested, Brenton, to see how closely these answers correlate with the answers to the previous poll and the different areas that each that our participants work in.
Yes, I'm afraid I doubt we can correlate that, but that would be an interesting question, wouldn't it?
Mm.
So a couple of people are asking, why is there is there not an all of the above or none of the above in there? And I did put some balanced options in there, but obviously I didn't want it to be too easy for everyone to just sit on the fence. So none of the above would probably mean you're not going to click anything, I suspect. But it was tricky to find wording for these that wasn't too provocative, because this isn't meant to be a harsh poll. It's obviously meant to be subjective as well. So a lot of you will be perhaps answering this just based on the environment you happen to be familiar with or involved in at the moment. It doesn't mean that everything's going to stay like that.
I like the question asking if we can blame marketing and finance. And I personally think that if marketing and finance aren't listening right now, then yes, you probably can.
So marketing and finance always get blamed unofficially, not on an official poll.
Yes. Yeah. Just shh, secret.
Yes.
If it's gonna get everyone that's in our chat currently to get along and live harmoniously together, I'm on board. But also, everyone should answer honestly.
That's an elevator poll, that one.
Yes, absolutely. Would you like to continue while we let the poll run, or would you like to? We don't actually have any questions in the Q&A section at the moment.
We haven't got a lot of questions there. I don't know that we've really tackled things that are question worthy yet. So we might get a few more questions as we go along. So that's okay. We can carry on. Let's end and share the poll, shall we? Or are people still answering? It seems to have slowed. No, a few more people are jumping in.
Yeah, people are still answering, but I think I'm going to just get your poll answers in the next sort of 10 seconds. And I will be, if you have an answer that you feel represents you, don't worry, it's not compulsory. And I'm going to end it just now. Okay.
Now, I do know that there's going to be a portion of our community here tonight that are looking at this from a security point of view. And I just want to point out that I'm putting security as a omnipresent function. I'm not separating it out. So security is going to be there no matter what piece of the puzzle you're in, no matter what stage of the process. Security and info security and that sort of thing is ever present and always relevant. So I'm not forgetting you guys in security, but I'm saying that you're always relevant. And so not going to single it out here. It's not part of a discrete part of the DevOps thing.
Absolutely. And our poll results, we do have a very clear front runner, which is with a whopping 48% of our participants have selected that devs and ops share equal blame, as neither work closely enough together to help each other succeed. The next most popular answer was the devs do try, but they're limited by low resources or high expectations. And then that's with 18%. And then with 14%, we have, I have little idea why it's so hard for either team. And then way down with 9%, we've got ops try to make new stuff work, but are under resourced or have unrealistic demands of reliability. Then we've got 8% on ops are more concerned about uptime of yesterday's stuff than letting tomorrow's stuff get deployed. And finally, 4% answered that devs do not try hard enough to make sure their stuff works reliably. So participants should be able to see that for the next, I'll keep that up for another slide or so. Is that all right, Brenton, with you?
Sure. I don't know if it's going to completely cover up the slide, is it? It might do.
It might do. Okay. Well, the poll results have been shared in the chat, so I'll stop sharing now.
I moved it across. It's out of my way. I'm not sure if it's out of everyone else's or not.
All good. Everyone can close it themselves. So I'll leave that up for you for a bit.
Thank you for that, Jack. It's an interesting point that you mentioned a whopping nearly half of the entries are saying, well, it's a bit of each. And I guess that's perhaps not too surprising, given that this is a subject around about trying to find the middle ground and accepting that there is middle ground. So from that point of view, that's a helpful idea to say, well, a lot of you are thinking in terms of, well, it's not necessarily one-sided. But then again, there's another big bunch of you who are feeling the pressure of a one-sided scenario, one-sided pressures, or more leaning to one side or the other. So hopefully what we're going to cover over the next tonight and the next few weeks is going to help build a bit more of a picture on how to bridge the gaps between them. So, and I'm sure a lot of you are looking for some tricks and tips along the way as to how to approach that. So hopefully we're going to be able to answer some of that. I want to start with something really obvious and significant. And this is about the structure, team structure. And I kind of alluded to this in my introductory video, where I said it's not as easy as just squashing the teams together. I mean, we know obviously it's not going to be as easy as just getting them all sit on the same floor, or put them adjacent, or make them have lunch together, or make them join each other's meetings. No, we wouldn't do that. But it's not a structural problem. So if you look at different kinds of team structures that exist in the world, if you look at what we might think of as a cross-functional team, this is where you often find situations where people are asked to do a wide variety of tasks. A cross-functional team, a team of people who are doing multi-functions and sitting on different problems, wearing different hats, is different from an integrated structure. An integrated structure where you might have members of the team that still preserve their skill sets, they preserve their functions, they preserve their areas of expertise as separate individuals, but they're part of an integrated team. Then you have the idea of teams that are actually separate teams, but they're aligned in such a way that the way they communicate and the way they work is very closely together on a task-by-task basis. So they might identify as being this team or that team, but they might work so closely together that those differences blur and are lost and overtaken by the synergies that they get out of that day-to-day, moment-to-moment interaction. Then you get the really traditional, old-fashioned, or yes, I'm using negative terms. It is a passing idea, as I mentioned a little while ago. Teams that work separately, think separately, do everything separately. And yes, there are many places in the world and many environments, many industries where that is still more common than it is in other places. But we also have just talked about some of the pressures of why that environment is being more and more recognized as not suitable. This is where you find the majority of the DevOps attitudes. This is where DevOps typically sits. It's either in environments where the skill sets are preserved, the job functions are preserved, but the team is meshed of individuals that work with other team members and identify with them, or the teams are still interacting with each other as a team, but very closely interacting with other teams next to them on a task-by-task basis. That's a little harder to do because it requires a bit of workflow discipline, but it can work just as effectively as having dev and ops physically, structurally move together. So this is the kind of structure ideology we're looking for. We're not looking for necessarily saying, right, you're going to do this, this, and this, start to finish. You're going to do the development, you're going to do the testing, and then you're going to maintain it for the next 6 months. You're all going to do that for your own feature. That's not necessarily what DevOps is expecting of us. We can still have people that stick to their expertise, stick to their function, but just work so closely with other experts and other functions that the synergy is maximized. Let's try and throw a summary up there about what are some of the key understandings of DevOps and what it's trying to do. It's a functional arrangement or agreement or dynamic between teams and between people. It's all about how they function together. It's not about where they sit. It's not about what's on their business card or their email signature. It's not about their title. It is, to some extent, about their job's description and their KPIs. It is a bit about how they're measured, because there's a certain collective measurement that needs to exist on top of what they might also be measured for discretely for their expertise. And yes, we're now very explicitly talking about development and operations, but it does have respect for the differences. And I make that point because it's not just about a difference of skill sets. It's not just, well, Fred's really good at developing and Mary's really good at maintaining stuff, but there's a reason why that is the case. There's often a reason why people have chosen these things. There are people who mentally and emotionally enjoy the process of creating, of conjuring up new, of making things appear from nothing and making them work, the origination, the ideation, and the development of something new. And these are people who might often be quite bogged down with the drama and the stress of alarms ringing, red lights, and problems. But then there are others who really do enjoy the pattern behavior of an operational environment where there's a certain pride in making sure that standards are met, things are maintained, stuff works, reliability exists, and problems are solved quickly and efficiently. There is a difference in the mindset between people that we need to recognize and leverage. DevOps is not trying to erode that. If anything, it's trying to leverage that. And it's trying to leverage the positivity of both sides of that equation. But it comes from something as a fundamental principle that I want to drill down on a little bit further, which is the idea of contiguous knowledge. Now, I'm not sure if many of you have yet, but there are on the learn.itmasters website, there is a few pre-recorded audio lectures, and there will be in subsequent weeks. So a few days before the webinar, there'll be some short audio lectures up there that you can get hold of and listen to that will give you a introductory theory-based ideas of what we're going to cover. So it's a core theory. In those for this week, you'll find that I talked a little bit about contiguous knowledge. So what is contiguous knowledge and what does it mean? It's a fundamental concept that is a distillation of many of the things that are going on in the DevOps environment. Contiguous knowledge is things that we know collectively in an IT environment. And I'm not specifically saying within Dev or within Ops, but broadly within IT. Actually, it applies to other departments as well. But there's three aspects to contiguous knowledge. It's being aware that the knowledge exists. This is criteria one. You have to know that somebody knows. The information exists. How many times have you experienced yourself a situation where you didn't know that the information was there? You didn't look for it. You didn't ask for it. You didn't try and find it because you didn't even know that it was there or that it might be there. You didn't have that awareness. That's step one of contiguous knowledge. The second is timeliness. When you find out about something, do you have it available to you when you need it? Can you get it now? Can you look it up? Can you find it? Can you ask? Can you get this piece of information on time? Or is it buried somewhere? Is it something you've got to request? Is it hard to access? And the third is it right? Is it valid? Is it correct? Is it useful? Is it relevant to what I'm doing? So the word contiguous means adjacent. It means right there, right next to you, within arm's reach in principle. So it's about having the knowledge, every bit of knowledge that you as a practitioner, whether or not you're a dev or ops, doing what you do. And there's a piece of knowledge that you need to do what you do well or to do it better. If it's contiguous, it's right there within reach and it's correct and you can use it. You can use it right now to deliver value and improve what you do. That's a cornerstone of what this big structural idea of DevOps is ultimately trying to deliver. Now, DevOps isn't a detailed join the dots methodology of how to something like this. It's much more like a philosophy. And when we think of it in that way, we think, well, what's it trying to tell us? What's the lesson learned? And the idea of contiguous knowledge is an important element. But a lot of you will be, thinking, nodding, yeah, that makes sense. I like the idea of having it. And some of you will have that to varying degrees, and some of you would wish that you had that. But there's a fundamental test about what really makes knowledge contiguous. And that is that it needs to be one action away from whoever needs it. I mean, if I need to know something, if I can make one call to one person and I get what I need, that's one action. I look up one place in one repository in one information. I look up one database. There it is. There's the information. I send one email to the right place, the right person. I get the information. One action, one step, and I get what I need. That's a hard test to pass for a lot of organizations. But that's the test you want to be able to pass to really empower those people to use that information to make the better decisions that delivers the better value. one action away. So if you think about what you normally go through to find a piece of information, when it's not one action away, what's the obstacle? It's like, well, I'm looking in this repository, but it's not well cataloged. It's not easily searched for the keyword that I'm looking for. So I didn't find it. It didn't pop up. Or it's really slow, or it's not cataloged correctly. Or I tried to reach that person, but they're busy, they're working on something else. They didn't get back to me. They didn't appreciate or understand the benefit that they could bring to me, the value that they could bring to me by responding to my query in a timely manner, because they don't know what I do necessarily, or they don't know what I'm doing with it. They don't necessarily have the philosophical idea that, hey, Brenton needs this. It's going to really help him. It's going to take me 2 or 3 minutes. I'll get back to him and let him know this thing. I'm going to empower Brenton to do this because he's asked and that's how it works. That's how contiguous knowledge, that's how the sharing of information empowers individuals to get that piece of work done. Because if you don't, what happens? Well, the request labors, it sits there, it lingers somewhere. It might get responded to, but if it's like an email, goodness, how many of them do we get every day? Or maybe people start to use more intrusive ways of getting our attention, like text, chat, etc. And the person who's waiting, well, how long do they wait? What kind of lag are they creating in their workflow? Do they go and do something else while they wait for this answer? What's happening to their brain whilst they go and do this other piece of work? It's all the neurons and all the neural pathways are being reconfigured to get them to think about something else. And then they get the answer, however long later. They've got to realign all those neurons and get back to thinking what they were thinking about before, and they lose efficiency, tons of it. And what happens when we lose efficiency? What happens when we lose that cognitive flow? Errors, mistakes, oversights, problems, technical debt. A lot of technical debt comes from the inefficiencies that we create by breaking up the cognitive flow that clever people need to perform at their cleverest. One action away is intended as a mantra, as a method of helping everyone know that to make sure that everyone is able to operate at their most efficient, we help them when needed. Now, some of you will be thinking, yeah, but Brenton, what about that person that just got interrupted and has to give an answer, right? So there is a balancing act where a person might say, okay, this is the scale of the interruption. I can allow that to interfere with what I'm doing and still maintain a flow. Or I'm going to schedule my reply. I'm going to let them know, hey, can I get back to you at this time frame? You manage the fact that they have a need. You take that need on, you're going to share it back to them. But it's not to say that everyone should be open to every interruption. Sometimes you need to schedule and structure them. That's why stand-up meetings were invented. Part of the Scrum mentality, the idea of having regular interactive moments where people can get together and share what it is they need, what it is they're working on. I'm going to work on this today. Hey, Fred, Mary, can you please keep an eye out for something from me? I might need your expertise on this. And I know what you do, so I know that you're the people I might need to call upon, and you know what I'm doing, so that you know the importance and value you would bring by being able to respond. Awareness of who knows what and who's doing what.
That is so fascinating, Brenton. I think that this is, I'm really, really understanding why there is such fantastic feedback given for your classes. Actually, this is deeply engaging. We've got a couple of questions here that I think it might be a good moment just before we go into some more specifics.
Let's do that.
To to jump on. So there are a couple of questions together that I think fall quite closely together in terms of what you were talking about. Neville would like to know if functional synergy is a key goal for DevOps. And then in addition to that, Jessica has asked if DevOps is a way of working following the end-to-end process across all functions. In short, no longer in silo based on its functional expertise. And I feel that these are somewhat
similar,
related.
I I would say, looking at Neville's question first, yes, definitely. It is, functional synergy is a key goal. Functional synergy is difficult to measure and it's difficult to describe. And so, yes, if you're talking about functions, you're talking about task by task. You're also talking about decision by decision, but you're talking also goal by goal. So the idea of shared goals or shared contribution towards goals is a way of defining a functional synergy, and the sharing of information and expertise about functions and tasks is another way of measuring or defining functional synergy. So I'd say Neville's absolutely right. It is that. But the devil is in how do you define that in a way that a group of people can collectively understand what that means to them and how they should operate. Which I guess leads into Jessica's point, saying is DevOps a way of working end-to-end processes across all functions? So I would say yes. I'd say also across all expertise, across all types of input and skill and knowledge. It's about saying, well, here's an end-to-end, here's a series of activities, here's a series of steps. And during these steps, you can take the benefit of things that aren't immediately obvious. Like during development stages, there is valuable input that can be gained from the reliability questions. What normally goes wrong? What are the customers normally most excited about? What's the biggest thing we need to avoid failing here? Where do we prioritize our single points of failure? And similarly, you have reverse opportunities where further down the line on testing and deployment, on why did this go wrong? We haven't seen this problem before. Well, dev can often be an immediate input to say, oh, well, that's because we did this way, and this is a way to fix that. So yes, it's end-to-end across all functions, but end-to-end across all expertise is the other important aspect of this. So certainly it's no longer siloed, but it's how much you share that also matters.
Great, thank you so much.
Jack?
Well, we've got a couple of questions around contiguous knowledge. So, I mean, a couple of these are, oh, actually, do you know, I might go back a little bit. There's a few more questions kind of coming in now, and there's a couple that are a little bit more definitional. So we're asking, oh, sorry, where's it gone? I scrolled and now, Kay Argyropoulos has asked, since development and operations don't share common mentality, which of those two is closer to the mentality of DevOps? Is it the case that there is one that is closer, or is it a sort of meeting in the middle, would you say?
So I'm going to cheat with my answer here, and I'm going to say that the one that's closest is finance, because it's value that matters, and the only people that judge value is the customer, and that's what they pay for. And if they don't pay for it, then the finance question overrules whether it's a dev perspective or an ops perspective. And what the value stream idea, and that's one of the pre-recorded audio, which is why we haven't gone over value streams here very much. But value streams are a way of saying the value stream sits above both dev and ops. And the implication is that both dev and ops are equally subservient to the idea of delivering value. They just have discrete or different or alternative roles to play in how that value was delivered. But the perspective, both teams need to subvert their original perspective and say, well, what is our role to delivering value? And it's different. And so I don't believe that there is realistically a leaning towards one way or the other. And I will say, however, though, that historically, in my experience, a lot of executives have leaned in favor of operations. And I say that because it's a financial reason that they're doing that. Because the moment operations has a problem, it much more quickly manifests and translates into a financial problem for the business. Because you start failing SLAs, you start having to give kickbacks, you start getting disappointed customers, they don't want to pay, they go elsewhere. It's very immediately a financial problem for the organization because the value and the expectation, the contractual commitments are immediately affected by that. So there's a tendency to lean towards, let's preserve the operations angle on this. But one of the reasons why operations struggles is because they're not getting enough synergy with the dev teams. And it's not about whose fault is that. It's simply that operations can perform better when dev is working very closely with them on very short timescales. And we'll get into timescales in later weeks when we talk about how do you make this work. There are some answers and there are some tips and tricks as to how to do that DevOps is offering us. So there'll be more about that later. But no, there's no one side that I'm suggesting should win that war.
Right. And very, very quickly, because I suspect that there may be a few people, particularly those who are less close to the action, so to speak, in their day-to-day lives on this. Harry has asked if we can have a brief definition of development or operations teams, e.g. in our company, the dev team is fairly self-explanatory, but ops is more of a gray area. We have an IT ops team for systems and an ops team that does QA and help desk. Is there a broad and overarching definition of development and operations, or is it just sort of what's designated that per company?
I'll give you the one that I'm using in creating the content that I produced for this subject. And that is that development includes the creation processes of anything new, which would include the project management of the creation of new things. And that might include the insertion of a new feature that you asked for yesterday and you install and go live tomorrow, which a lot of organizations do today. I mean, we know that a lot of major organizations push their software to their live systems a couple of times a day. And feature requests can go in and be put to live within 24 hours. And so from that point of view, I think that, I lost my train of thought. I think that development is the process of creating the new thing. Operations is everything that is dealing with the ongoing delivery of what's been promised. So think about it from that point of view. Promises get made and commitments get made. And usually that's the beginning of the exchange of value. And even if you're talking about an internal customer who's not necessarily paying an invoice, there's still an agreed exchange of value. And operations preserves what's already been promised and is already being expected. And that could include, help desk, that'll include first, third, second, third level, etc. It'll include infrastructure. But then infrastructure is going to sit on both sides of the fence as well, because infrastructure needs to grow to accommodate new things. But anything that preserves an existing promise is operations. Anything that expands on that promise is development. That's how I view it.
That's a very succinct and easily understandable way to sum that up. Thank you very much. We might take some more questions in a little bit, but if you would like to continue on with your content.
Yep. All right. I'm going to go through a few quick points, rather punchy, because I'm going to talk now about the influences from a couple of things. And so because we're not going to go through these in great detail, because a lot of this we are going to talk about more in the coming weeks. So we will certainly grab some questions on these at the end, but we're also going to be able to answer them in coming weeks as we go through these in more detail. I want to talk about lean. So lean was created as the ideas of lean started way back in the 50s and 60s, but they really crystallized for a lot of people in the 80s and more widely spread in the 90s. It's a lot about a process or an understanding of reducing wastage. And it began in manufacturing and credited to Toyota for really crystallizing the way this works. And it's a lot about just in time. It's about making sure that, for example, on the vehicle assembly line, you have the chassis of the vehicle going down the assembly line and you have various bits getting added to it. And a simple explanation of lean is that the engineers that are putting the door on the left-hand side, well, in the early days, they might have half a dozen doors sitting there waiting, ready to go. And the car would roll forward and the chassis would turn up and they'd put the next door on. And there's several doors waiting. Now, that's wastage, according to lean. Those 4 or 5 doors, they've already been created. They're sitting there taking up space. They've taken up materials. They're not being converted into value. And they'll sit there for a period of time. And you look at across the entire factory, there's lots of idle stuff going on. And you look at why that's the case. Well, Surely it would be better if the door arrives just as the chassis arrives and then the person puts it on. But the question then immediately comes up is, well, hang on, what if there's just a hiccup in the door manufacturing and the doors are running late? The whole assembly line has to stop, right? We can't allow that. So what's the old answer? Let's just get ahead of it and put half a dozen doors there. The lean answer is, what's wrong with the door production that causes it to fail periodically? Let's fix that. Let's make that perfect. And so now you've gone from back in the 70s and 80s when producing anything took months to work up a production line and there was long times of production. Now you can get something up and running in production in most manufacturing in significantly quicker times. How is this influencing DevOps though? Well, the idea of lead time versus processing time is a fundamental issue of what lean is all about and what DevOps has adopted. So lead time is is a chronological thing. It's the amount of time between when you ask for a thing and when you get that thing at the other end, right? So the gap between the two is your lead time. Now, we all know that you might wait 3 weeks for something, but that doesn't mean that it actually took the entirety of those 3 weeks to produce it. The processing time is the amount of actual time spent working on something. And we used to call that like working hours or man hours or things like that. That's the time that's actually spent on the thing. The rest of the time is in waiting for something. And lean is all about reducing the wastage of everything, including idle time, the waiting time. So the principles of lean is about, let's get rid of as much waiting as we can. Why would you put a feature request in, wait for it to go through a BA business analysis process for the first week, let it go to executives for approval, it goes back for some other feedback, then it goes into the development team, they have a look at it, give some points on it, then it comes back, and then it'll go into a development queue, someone will actually do that. They'll actually create it. Then a week or so later, the ops team in the test environment will look at that and say, yeah, that's kind of working, not kind of working. The testers will have a look at it, maybe send it back. It'll go for a few days in dev, then come back to the testers. The testers will say, yeah, that's okay. Let's now put that into ops. Ops will finally see it at this point. They haven't heard of it before now. They'll look at it and say, well, hang on a sec. There's a whole bunch of other things that we need to take into account here. Weeks go by before you get delivery. In a DevOps environment, what happens is that the feature request is the boss of everything and everyone. And it arrives on Monday morning. And the dev team, the testers, and the ops teams, the people relevant, they get together on Monday morning and look at this feature request. And they've all got stuff to do about that. And they go and do their stuff. And the devs are busy creating it. The ops are busy preparing for it. Testers are creating their test environment. It's tested by lunchtime and it's launched that afternoon. So that's an extreme example of the difference between lead time and processing time. But this is where lean is contributing to what DevOps is trying to do. Get rid of wastage. Wastage is anything that increases the lead time or increases the processing time or anything else, increase cost, risk, anything. It's also small, incremental. Now, if you're going to have a bunch of people that are going to get together from different disciplines and they're going to look at a feature on Monday morning and try and get that live by the next day, then they're only going to be able to work on a small amount of things on that day, right? It's not going to work if they've got a to-do list of 50 more things that they have the pressure and the responsibility of juggling and prioritizing and saying, oh, let's do these things today. And the testers are saying, well, we want to do these things today. And ops is looking at something else. They're all on different value stream activities at different times. This is about lining them up with a small incremental thing that everyone can look at, one thing at a time. And that means the information flows seamlessly. In that moment of interaction, of synergy, you have a flow of knowledge and understanding between all of the disciplines required so that everyone can have a complete context of what this thing is that needs to be done. And they can all bring their knowledge, expertise, and experience to bear on the decisions that need to be made so that the best decisions get made all at once while it's all clear in everybody's head. And when you've stopped thinking about it, it's done. It's not in some other queue somewhere. It's live because that's what's meant to happen when you're done with it. It's live. That's the DevOps approach that And this is where it's come from lean. Now, let's take that into flow. Kanban, which directly translates into visual signals. It's a method of trying to help us flow smoothly. So some of the principles that DevOps has borrowed from the idea of flow, and yet Kanban, lean did also take a lot from Kanban through that. They grew up together in the last century. So the flow idea is about just in time, just doing only what you need to do when you need it, have what you need when you need it. But it's also about making sure it's all visible. So Kanban is the idea of like work cards, everything visible. Like everything's up on a board or up on a screen or in some way visible, that we can all see what's coming, and we can all see where the bottlenecks might be, and we can predict the bottlenecks, and therefore we can avoid the bottlenecks. So complete visibility is a way of helping everyone know what their role is in what's going on right now, what's important right now. And right now is a limitation element that Kanban also introduces. You're just limiting the work in progress. You're not saying, I'm going to work on these 6 different things, and I'm going to work on a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. I'm going to be terribly inefficient, but I have to, because I have to show the boss that I'm making progress on everything. That's not what DevOps is asking us to try and do. That's not what Kanban asks us to do. It says, you look at this bit of work, one little bit of work that you're looking at, and that's what you're working on at that time. What can reasonably be completed on time, allowing you to focus, allowing everyone to focus. And you saw it was coming because it's been moving its way along the workflow. Kanban also is a big emphasis on, as you see the workflow and as the visibility is there to everything is open for improvement. We should be looking at everything, thinking of everything, trying to get everything improved, working on everything that we might be able to spot a way of doing things better, even if it's not what we do. But we know a thing from our perspective that gives us insight, that lets us add and contribute. How did Toyota fix the problems with the door manufacturing line, where their solution was to build a buffer ahead? How did they fix those problems? They went to the people that actually worked on the line and said, what problems do you have? What should we do about it? And those people had the answers, or at least the suggestions. Well, if we did this, I wouldn't drop this, and this wouldn't happen, and this wouldn't be an issue. Same thing happens with DevOps. Opportunities for improvement are consistent. They're always there, and we should always look for them and grab them. This means that where people are pulling what they do, it's not a push thing. It's not like, here's your to-do list for this week. Here's all the stuff I want you to work on. See what you can get done. It's the individuals and the teams pulling the work in. This is the Scrum idea as well. This is the idea of the sprint planning. You only put into the sprint what everyone is willing to take on. And in DevOps, you only take on what people believe and understand and can commit to completing.
Sorry, I
Yes,
did
Jack.
something strange with the microphone there, but we've got
Okay.
a couple more questions really
Good
quickly.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, would you like to answer questions about some general questions around sort of what people need to do to get into DevOps professionally now, or would you prefer to keep those towards the end? Because we've got a few that are more sort of general around those.
Yeah, look, those ones, let's leave them for a sec, because the next couple of slides are going to try and bring it all together.
Fantastic. Bring it home.
Tie a few knots around things and bring it back to a couple of other originally echoed points. And so then will be a good time to talk about the career direction, et cetera. And also a good time if people have questions about how that summarization and hanging together really works. So,
Brilliant.
So I'll do that. So a new idea that I've presented a lot of you with is the idea of contiguous knowledge. It's an odd word, we don't use it very often, but DevOps isn't just contiguous knowledge, it's contiguous everything. Agile is contiguous everything. Contiguous information means having the information you need, the knowledge right next to you, knowing what's out there, knowing who's out there, where to find it, who to ask, how to get it, making sure that it's accessible, that one action away. Contiguous knowledge, contiguous information is a part of it. but also having skills and experience, not just yours, everybody's, adjacent to you, as if it's adjacent to you. One action away, I can bring in whatever skill and whatever experience I need to bring to bear on this question, on this problem, on this decision, on this action. With one action, I can have the right skills and expertise looking at this. That's what I need to be able to do to be efficient. Workflow, having everything that I need, the resources that I need, whether it's the people, the information, the tools, the systems, it all needs to be next to me, adjacent to me, adjacent to the decision, adjacent to the action, the task being carried out, which means the decisions need to be made. It's not about saying, well, you know, we need to make a decision about a couple of things. Let's call a meeting for next Tuesday afternoon and we'll all get together in a room and hash it out. It's about what decisions do I need to make today? And this is why things like stand-up meetings are about saying, well, what are you working on today? And that's the opportunity to say, I'm going to be working on these things. These decisions are going to come up. And I'm going to hope to get access to this person and this person, this information, this skill expertise, and this resource, and this thing, all these things I need for this to work today. And everyone who needs to know knows that. So that the decisions that get made are made just when you need to make them, with the best information to influence those decisions. And because you're making the decision only when you need to, you have the latest and best and updated information. So you're not having to make contingency plans as much. You're not having to pad decisions. You're not having to be as protective, as careful, because you're not having to build in for possible uncertainties, no more than you absolutely need to. So, as a summary of what we talked about tonight, DevOps is about making all these things, the work activities, the tasks, the knowledge, the skills, the decisions, all contiguous and adjacent to that moment and that person for whom they are needed when they create value. Whether they are creating value in the original development of a new feature, or whether they're creating value in the solving of an ongoing technical problem that maximizes uptime or prevents a problem, or dealing with an incident. No matter what end of it we're looking at, DevOps is about that person who owns that having whatever they need one step away. This is a quick look at next week. I'm going to put these up. I'm just going to leave them up there whilst we take a few questions. Jack, now's probably a great time to do that. This is what we're going to talk about next week. It's a little bit more detail on how we're going to look at flow within DevOps. So we're going to break down a few things and make it a little bit more practical about how DevOps flows. So let's see if we've got some great questions to add. And if you have any questions you've been sitting on, now's the time to put them in, because at some point, if we get too many, we might have to close off the new questions, but we've got plenty of good ones there to answer by the looks.
Yeah, so I might go with a couple of the more professionally focused ones at the moment. So I've got a couple, we've had a few questions along these lines. So sorry to anyone whose question has been dismissed. There were a few that sort of hit similar points and we have limited time for questions, but there's plenty of opportunity to ask questions on learn.itmasters.edu.au, where you can also access all of the course materials. So Michael has asked, do I need to know how to code to be a DevOps engineer? But Sharon has also asked, what would be the best learning path to become full DevOps confident? Coding and operations both required?
So when we're talking about merging DevOps together, it's the same question you'd look at as in terms of management of either one of those. If you were looking at, and it is a leadership function. So DevOps together is, if you're looking at the how to DevOps, then that is a leadership management perspective. If you're looking at being in that, then you're probably doing a technical function. And so there's such a wide variety of technical functions, then you have the freedom to say, well, you could pick any of those, and it could be coding, or it could be networking, or it could be security, or it could be something else. It could be an admin, server admin, etc. It could be web services that you're managing. And there are a bunch of specialized courses that help people go in certain directions. DevOps will include all of that and more in terms of technical expertise. And yes, at that layer, a lot of it is engineering, but there are a lot of easy ways to get into some of the things that ultimately become technical. And I say technical, but technology these days, what we call technology is often simply complexity. So the idea of running, for example, cloud-based services, you have to know what they do, and you have to know how to manage what each function does. But that's a different layer from building that functionality underneath. There's so much that cloud services make readily available at the click of a button that we need to know more often how it works and how to leverage it than we need to know how to build it. And so there's another layer available where you have to have a lot of, perhaps you might call it product expertise about what certain features can do within cloud computing. But that's a different layer from the technical services underneath it. If you are part of the engineering team at Amazon Web Services or Azure or anywhere else, then yes, you're going to need to know how to underpin it. But for a lot of businesses that are utilizing it, you're going to need to know how to make use of the features and apps that they offer. Different layer. If you're talking about how to philosophically bring teams together, then you don't necessarily need a great deal of technical knowledge to do that, but you do need to have a deep understanding of how those functions play out. And to be a combined DevOps leader, I do think you need a really good understanding of what development looks and feels like, and what operation looks and feels like, and to some extent what infrastructure and information security looks and feels like. You're not going to be as effective bringing all those things together without a sufficient working knowledge of all of those arenas. But by the same token, you don't necessarily have to be fully capable and up to date with delivering on those. It really depends on how big the organization is. Some organizations are a little bit smaller, and people that are even in leadership roles still have to get in and configure things. That depends on it. So it is still mostly a technical realm, but there is a growing need for things like data science. There's a growing need for database wranglers, API wranglers, various things that are perceived as less technical than they used to be. It's like Excel. Like, remember the days when you had Excel wizards, right? People that were brilliant at doing macros or pivot tables when they were new things, right? I remember when people that really could do well with Excel, they could accomplish amazing things. But were they technical, or were they just really good app users? You could say the same thing about a lot of the cloud services systems, just at a much greater level of complexity.
Great.
How many questions did we nail with that?
We nailed about 5 with that, so I'm very impressed.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
We've got a couple of questions that are more about platforms, so I might tie some of those together as well. So Jessica's asked, in applying Kanban influences, is Trello the best and only tool? I believe there's a number of tools for Trello specifically, for Kanban as well. And Neville asks, is velocity in Scrum the same as Kanban flow?
So tools, look, a few years ago, I probably could have pointed to a couple of tools that I would have said these are leaders. Most of those have been bought by someone else since then. And one of them's changed hands at least twice and has been rebranded. It's just so fast. It's too difficult to keep track of. I don't think there's, at the moment, any clear winners. If you get into very niche things, then occasionally, yes, you do find some strong candidates. But I mean, Trello is an example of a good platform, but I don't believe it's the only one. And I do think, if you wait 10 minutes, there'll be a couple more next week. It's that kind of environment at the moment. Everyone is trying, but there's a lot of guesswork going on about what's a good tool. The one thing I would suggest to anyone considering tools, look for flexibility, look for customization, because what you need it to do is going to change, and what it can do is going to grow and evolve. And tools that have higher degrees of customization, flexibility, and tailoring available built into them are going to last longer in your organization. And I would suggest you consider that as a question to be answered as part of your review. I once did a business workflow implementation for an organization many, many years ago. This was back when these were new ideas with dashboards and business workflow, managing all the way from the customer invoice and pre-sales engineering all the way through implementation and then ongoing delivery. And we took a tool that was never built for that. It was essentially a finance tool, but it had so much flexibility that we could build workflow into it. And that's what we did. I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily what you need to do anymore, but the tools themselves, if you've got flexibility, you'll value that more than what they can do right now today, is my view. What was the second part of that question, Jack? I had it in my head a second ago.
That is a great question. It may have been answered already. It was asking about, oh, hang on. It was asking about, is velocity in Scrum the same as Kanban flow? Is that just another tool? I'm not familiar with that one.
Velocity requires flow. So velocity is yes, it's similar, because velocity is about delivering value at a certain rate. It is about reducing wastage. It is about making sure that you are achieving completion, and that is an element of Kanban and of flow. But there's more things underpinning that. So it relies upon a good flow and a good continuous delivery. But it is a way of describing that from a user story perspective in a more narrow confine of a Scrum project delivery, which is perhaps more self-contained than you might see with an ongoing value stream environment, where you're not in a project, you're in something that's live and you just keep adding something to it every week, is less likely to be fully Scrum. But there's going to be some similarities and overlaps in the way things happen. You might still have your daily stand-ups. You might still have various roles that are similar. You have a methodology person, you have a product person, you have a customer person, etc. Velocity as a word might still be the thing you call it, but really what you're trying to talk about is flow and efficiency and lean movement of things in a smooth manner through the workflow.
Great, fantastic. Well, we've got a couple around frameworks and things. So Ibrahim has asked, how do we compare DevOps to the Waterfall method? And Ashok has asked, is there a framework or template to implement in an organization like ITIL?
So it's not like ITIL yet. DevOps does have quite a few champions. It has a few people that are trying to put more and more framework around it. It's not, I mean, it's been around for a while. It sort of first came about in the late 2000s, 2007-ish is when it was first being used and talked about. But, that's sort of when it was first defined as that. But the things within it, organizations had already been experimenting with it since the 90s and trying to figure it out. And it continued to grow through the last 10 years. And what's really kicked it along has been cloud computing. That's been the enormous driver. The opportunities that cloud computing has brought about for organizations to deliver information to their clients or to their own staff, and what that means in terms of pushing. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that organizations like Facebook would be pushing code to their platform live twice a day? And, it was kind of an interesting and novel and exciting thing when they started doing that. Now, lots of big organizations do it at that pace. So every organization has to figure out their own way of doing it. But because DevOps is in this neat, mature position of leaning on a bunch of other ideas and philosophies that were sort of growing up alongside it or even before it, it's both simultaneously flexible enough to say, well, this is important to us and this is important to us, so we're going to lean in these areas. So our version of DevOps is going to be a bit different. We're not able to follow a more strict methodology like what you would get with ITIL. What you will find, though, is an increasing glossary of terms and this is one of the things that ITIL brought to IT service management, is using the same terminology, defining things in a similar way. And I think you'll see more and more of that with DevOps. But unfortunately, it's not easy to just go and say, well, I'm just going to go and buy a guide on the DevOps standard and use that. We're not at that stage yet. So there's still lots of individual ways of doing things that organizations need to figure out for themselves. And this is part of what this course is about trying to give you enough to figure out your own path to some extent.
Great.
How does
It
it compare
seems,
to the
yeah.
waterfall? Was that part of the
Mhm.
question so waterfall is, in the decision and agility perspective, waterfall is the opposite approach to solving a similar problem. The similar problem is risk. What's the risk of making a mistake? And you just boil it down to that. So Scrum Agile versus Waterfall, two ends, two methods of solving a single problem is, how do we avoid the risk of making a mistake? And Waterfall's approach is, well, we figure it all out in advance. We figure out every possibility. We get every expert in, we estimate, we painstakingly work through everything, and then we build in contingencies. We lock things in so they don't get messed about with, because that'll cause us problems. But we build mechanisms in that allow us an authorized, regulated change control that very tightly controls how we evolve things. And that's our way of protecting ourselves from making a mistake, because we're extremely thorough and we're extremely careful. Agile comes along and says, yeah, but what if it's so new, you just can't? What if no one's ever done it before and you've got no idea? How do you plan for that? Well, you need a different method that says, we're going to learn something every week. And we're going to learn something that we need to adapt to and take into account every week. We can't think of it all in advance. We need a method of dealing with decisions that's going to say, right, here's our decisions for today. Where's all the information we need? Pull all that information in, make the best decision today, and be ready to change our minds completely next week. And that's the methodology. And it's still got the same objective. How do we avoid making a mistake? And we avoid that with the Agile method by using the best, latest, and greatest information and skills and experience in that decision, and be ready to change it when we've learned that it's wrong, rather than waiting way down the track and discovering then that it's wrong. Change it as soon as we know. But we know we're going to make mistakes. We'll just fix them really fast.
Fantastic.
So it's a million decisions. Both Waterfall and Scrum, for example, are a million decisions. You just make them at different times.
Right. Well summed up. And actually, you touched a little on security in that and risk in that answer. So we might go to, there's a pair of questions. Arsan has asked, is DevOps also applied for managed services security implementation? And Behalu, apologize if I've mispronounced anyone's names, has asked if there is a different context when you implement DevOps for security and intelligence solutions.
Different context, yes. Different perspective, yes. Slightly different KPIs, different success criteria, yes. Slightly higher consequences against risk, yes. If your feature doesn't work quite right, the customer's not quite happy, you could fix that. If your security doesn't work quite right, the consequences could be astronomically bigger. So there are different levels of tolerance and there are different levels of stringency, but absolutely, it is the same idea, the same method. I'll give you one of the best examples that I've heard of recently, and some of you might have already come across this. There was numerous news articles, and this is what fascinated me. So many people found it newsworthy that in what Starlink was doing for Ukraine in providing them with Starlink services, Starlink faced a security problem. They faced a problem with interference from adversaries that were trying to stop them from making their system work. The engineers, within, I think, a few hours, made a code change, pushed it, and solved the problem. And the news articles were about, my goodness, if this was a defense thing, it would have taken months, weeks at least, for all of the processes to be gone through, because oh my God, it's a security thing. We can't just change that on the fly. But they did. And they did it because they had the best of their minds and people and expertise in the same space, in the same problem, making the decision together. They got the best decision they were ever going to get. Why wait? Make the best decision, do it, fix it. If it's not right, we'll make another code change tomorrow and fix it even better. And that was their approach. And it was marveled and in many circles of being, wow, that's just like not how many people are used to seeing that sort of thing done and handling a security issue. But I believe there is absolutely tremendous scope for those kinds of synergies to play out and greatly improve the security and InfoSec operations.
Wow, fascinating. That is, yeah, really, really impressive. I do remember hearing about some, or reading some of those articles as well. So it's a great perspective on that. On a more sort of formal risk note, Michael's asked, risk is important in today's environment. How does line 1, line 2, and line 3 risk operate within a DevOps discipline?
That's okay. That's getting a bit more detailed. I think that what I would say with risk is that the organization sets its tolerance for risk, and that's set at a level above IT services. And that's something, if you think about, it's a governance issue. Governance of IT, which is where risk and security examples live, that gets inherited from corporate governance, which is defining what risks the organization is willing to take. And so that's something that DevOps ultimately inherits and is subservient to. So DevOps is not in a position to push back on what those standards are at any of those layers. It's effectively got to say, well, we are a way of implementing that, but we still have to work within what the organization's tolerance is. And that's always going to be superseding anything else that DevOps wants to do with security. So it's a good description to talk about the DevOps as a discipline, but generally you'll find that information security and risk management is a more senior discipline to DevOps and will set the standard for what DevOps needs to do. So if you think about IT like a COBIT environment, which is a framework and structure for managing risk and governance of enterprise IT, it's going to be sitting above DevOps because it's going to be sitting above everything, every methodology, every different way that anything is done, whether it be infrastructure or anything else. The way in which risk is managed is dealt with at a higher layer. But it still necessitates that those executive decision makers need to sufficiently understand the way that their DevOps teams works and are going to implement their risk profile in the same way that they would understand how their infrastructure is going to implement and manage risk, in the same way that their dedicated InfoSec teams are going to do it, in the same way that any other team or department is going to have to deal with those risks. We might touch on that a little bit more when we get into some of the other topics in the next couple of weeks as we break it down into different areas.
Great. We've got a couple of questions here. Abdul Majid has said, what's the relationship between DevOps and network?
So network, I see as infrastructure. Network is where I spent most of my technical career in network creation, maintenance, etc. Network is a support element of both dev and ops. Network is normally associated with ops, but it's aligned. It has to be able to support both. So as an infrastructure component, it's equally involved as just another set of expertise. When you look at most of what DevOps talks about, it's usually talking about the services that sit on top. And yes, that normally means software, but software is such a broader thing at the moment. We're talking about anything that's service oriented. And all of that needs bandwidth, needs routing, needs firewalling, needs all those things that network provides. And so there's a lead time element on infrastructure of any kind, especially network, that it needs advanced warning. It needs to know that if you want this stuff happening down here, you need more capacity, you need more bandwidth, you need more of this, you need whatever. And I mean, in my time in being directly involved, it was a constant headache, because it's not just about, well, let's just increase the size of the link. That often means you need to change the terminating points, which means you need to change the equipment at either end. You might need to change the firmware at either end. You have to change the configuration. Tons of things have to change often when you increase network capacity. But that's just one piece of infrastructure management. So I don't think it necessarily has a special relationship with either dev or ops. it has a symbiotic relationship with both, as all of the other infrastructure type services would have.
Great. Thank you very much. We might go to this question, which has been sitting there for a little while now, and I think it is very, it's a bit of a broader question. So we're asking, do you find that that DevOps can be implemented effectively at an individual level, or is this an organization/division-wide change? And I suppose that is, how much of a top-down decision to implement a DevOps kind of framework does it need to be, or can it be something that people bring in themselves?
Look, I think for the organization, it needs to be top-down. For it to work for the organization's benefit, it needs to be universal. But that doesn't mean that individuals can't work themselves with a DevOps mindset. It doesn't mean that anyone can decide that understanding the benefits of an integrated contiguous environment means they might work in a way that makes them very accessible to others and helps others reciprocate back to them. One of the best ways to get other people to respond to you is to be responsive to them and make that synergy work at a personal level. And yes, that's a small piece, and it's a far cry from what you could get if everyone was doing it. So for it to work organizationally, there has to be a top-down mandate that says we should do this, because there's going to be pushback, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be people that don't want to do it that way. And there's going to need to be a certain amount of executive mandate and policy behind why we're changing and getting people on board. Change management will need to happen. But if that's not happening, I wouldn't say that there's nothing you can do. There's still ways that you might be able to learn a trick or two from DevOps that will make your life easier, and perhaps others as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I suppose that mentioning change management, we have another question asking if change management is a blocker for DevOps.
Yes, I used a different context for change management. I should clarify that. The comment I just made was about organizational change and change management from that point of view, to implement a DevOps regime, if you like. Where this question, I think, and I assume is tackling it from, is change management as a technical process of technical change. So change management, if you take a step back and just look at the language, the management of changes is an integral and necessary part. You could flip it on its head and say that change management is actually the reason for DevOps' existence. It's a reason for it to be there, because if you want to manage your changes as well as possible, you want the people building the change and the people maintaining the new normal, you want them working together as best as you can for your change to succeed. Now, that might not be what Tariq is talking about. He might be talking about a more traditional change management where it's all about slowing it down, locking it down, fill this form in triplicate, let's be super careful, and we're going to not change management, but change control, which is not what DevOps is all about. DevOps is about facilitating the right changes and delivering them as best as they can be delivered. So it is meant to be working on the same line. It really just comes down to paradigms, and whether you're stuck in an older paradigm of change control rather than a paradigm of what really should be change management for success. Hopefully I got that assumption right.
Yeah, fantastic. I thought it was a great answer. Hopefully anonymous attendee is also satisfied with that. We'll take a couple more questions really, really quickly.
Should we block new ones at this point so we can just
yes.
finish off what's left?
Unfortunately, we're not able to actually do that, but we can't do it on an official capacity within Zoom, but we just are not going to answer any further questions. Okay. So I suppose we've got a couple more questions. Let's go with some of these more general ones. Let's tie them together for the end, because I think that they come under an umbrella. So Joey's asked, what's the key difference between DevOps and IT project management? Nazmul has asked, what is the relationship between DevOps and DevSecOps? And Baal has asked, does DevOps involve prioritization or more of a FIFO approach, FIFO? And
So
BJ has asked, does DevOps come under QA or Ops or Dev? So very
yeah,
broad, very general.
good
Feel free to throw
contextual
in as much of that as
question.
you would like. Yeah.
So let me go through them one at a time, I think might be the best way. The key difference between DevOps and IT project management. Project management is usually about the creation of something large and generally self-contained. It's a big thing. Now, you might have a DevOps environment in which IT project management will bring in new big pieces of work, and you'll use IT project management to do that. And if it's software, you might use extreme programming, you might need lean software development, you might use Scrum or a blend of all these things. You'll have a way of doing that. You might have projects that are not code, they are including infrastructure, and so you'll have other ways of bringing those projects into life. DevOps focuses more on the small things, the small changes. When that project goes live, it's not going to just stay that way forever. There's going to be something new added tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, or there should be, because if you don't keep evolving, growing, and improving, your competitors probably will. So DevOps is more interested in the thing that's there that you want to add something to, change something, fix something, etc., on an ongoing basis. And there's the extreme examples, twice a day, perhaps. So that's where DevOps is coming at to solve that need. Because from DevOps's point of view, Scrum works, extreme programming works. Those things do that job for that big thing that you've got to do. But that big thing you've got to do is still a value stream. And that value stream has still got to be creating something that gets managed. And when it gets managed on an operational basis, you're still going to want to tweak it. Even though the project is done, you're still going to want to tweak it. And it'll be DevOps that'll be maintaining an ongoing relationship between development and operations from that point on. So how does that relate to dev security operations? I sort of hinted at this before. Security does have a senior function because it's driven by the risk appetite of the organization. And so that's going to be the starting point to define what risks are allowed to be taken. And no matter what task you're looking at what stage in the workflow process, from original analysis and ideation and creating user stories to the creating of the code through to the testing in a live environment or pre-production to running it in production, they're all going to be answerable to the security risk appetite of the organization. So you're still going to have to, in some cases, depending on what it is, work with the security requirements and link back to them. There's just going to be one more expert in the room, one more expert in the meeting, one more expert looking at the problem, doing the testing, looking at the analysis, one more person that's one action away that you can call upon to say, is this meeting the security requirements? In the same way that you might have any other technical requirements. The last point there about prioritization or FIFO, first in, first out is, in my view, first in, first out is more of the push mentality, because who decides what's first? Whoever gets it in the queue first, right? That's the in tray thing, right? If you're the first in the in tray, you should be the first one out. And that's usually decided by whoever puts it in first. But that's not necessarily the right way. If you look at the way Scrum tends to do things, it's a much more collaborative, broader decision-making. There are other stakeholders that have an input on what's the priority, which feature. And ultimately, it's going to come back to the customer anyway. They're going to be the ones that are having at least a starting point on what should be first, because what's most valuable to them. So I don't think the first in, first out is usually going to be the way things work, unless if you're doing a self-contained project and people are running a number of sprints and they get to decide that I want to do this bit now and I want to do that bit later. But even then, that's still a negotiated thing, because at some point you need to do incremental billing for what you're producing. So there's still a release timetable for features and capability that has to be answered to. So there is definitely prioritization, and there are definitely stakeholders involved in that. The last point, does DevOps come under QA, Ops, or Dev? I think very much it's a merging of all of those. I don't think it comes under any of them. I think it is a philosophy that says that all of this is together. And I think you might find it's above all of them. And so you could say that those are components of a complete and successful DevOps team, but they're not the only components. Security might be a component. Infrastructure might be a component. Something of data science might be a component. Business analysis might be a component. Sales engineering might be a component, because they're the ones that are out there interacting with the customers at the customer-facing side of things, understanding the technical requirements of what the customer is asking at a user story level. All of those could be pieces of the DevOps machine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brenton. Brilliantly. We have whipped through many, many questions. Apologies to everybody who didn't have their questions that weren't able to be answered. We are running out of time, but you are, as always, able to ask any questions and have all of the discussions that you wish to your absolute heart's content, any time of the day or night, on learn.itmasters.edu.au, where you can find all of the course materials, as well as the recordings from the lectures from the short course, as well as the quizzes, which will go up within 24 hours, along with the recordings. And for people who are finding this particularly interesting as well, which I know I did, thank you very, very much, Brenton. That was really fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks of this course. There are some additional IT Masters resources. So the slide that is up on screen at the moment is first, we've got a list of some of the more recent short courses that we've run. So because we record the short courses, everything that we produce in this arena is uploaded and it stays online at learn.itmasters.edu.au. And you can continue to go through, enjoy as many of those short courses as you like, dip your toe in as many of subject areas as you find interest you. And then for those, which leads into, for those interested in studying one of the full-length subjects, because all of this material is taken from our full-length university subjects that we offer. If you're interested in courses like the Graduate Certificate in Computing, Business Administration, either the Master's or the Graduate Certificate, or Cybersecurity, as well as a number of others that we offer, such as Project Management and Cloud Computing and Virtualization, some of those subjects listed on the right. If you successfully complete 3 of our short courses, we will offer you 1 course credit towards a degree if you begin to study with us. If you're interested in having a look at what you might be eligible for, feel free to follow the link that Kit is going to drop in the chat at the moment to find out about your eligibility to study with us, as well as eligibility for any course credit, which we also offer based on industry certificates and work experience as well, where that's relevant. And one other thing that we would like to mention at the moment is, if you are an Australian citizen, several of our courses in cybersecurity, cloud computing and virtualization, networking and systems administration, and the Graduate Certificate in Computing career transition are currently available if you would like to apply for the Australian Defence Force Cyber Gap Scholarship. So that is a program that is available for, again, unfortunately, for our international people, Australian citizens only. It's a 12-month program developed in partnership between the Department of Defence and the digital profession, joining tertiary study with extensive career development opportunities, relevant work experience, and generous financial support to provide participants with invaluable and competitive career advantages. So it's a scholarship program that is available from the Australian Defence Force that quite uniquely for funding for education from the ADF does not come with a requirement to serve in the ADF. Quite a large number of our students have applied for and successfully received this scholarship in the past, and we have received great feedback from our students about the mentoring and other opportunities that are available through that scholarship, as well as the up to $15,000 of your course fees that will be covered by that. So have a look on our website at itmasters.edu.au if you're interested to find out more about that. And if you're interested in any other kind of long-term study, don't hesitate to get in touch with us, either at info@itmasters.edu.au, or you can fill out our eligibility form, which Kit's just dropped the link in the chat to as well. which is fantastic. So that's, we do offer these short courses for free, but if you are interested in getting a little bit more in depth, there are our full-length options. And once again, thank you very, very much, Brenton. This was a fantastic session. I'm so glad that you're back facilitating them.
Me too. And I think it's a really exciting thing that you can get a subject credit for 3 free courses. I mean, the courses themselves are all interesting in their own right, but they're not difficult. They're easy to absorb. They're easy to get through, and you could do 3 different ones and you get a free subject credit. I think that's amazing.
It is. It's quite unique. I've never really seen anything quite like it in the past.
Much of that out there, so that's really cool. And it is great to be back, and I'm looking forward to being back next week, where we'll get into some more exciting stuff, and great working with you guys.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much to Kit for the back of house, for the technical support and everything that you've provided to run this extremely smoothly. And thank you very much to all of our fantastic participants. Hopefully we'll see you all back here next week at 7:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, or wherever that translates to in your region of the world. Thank you, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or good night, I suppose.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Kit, for all your wonderful efforts tonight. And thank you, everyone, for all of your fantastic questions, comments in the chat, and all the other forum posts that I'm sure many of you will still add. Until next week, that's all from us for now. Thank you and good night.